Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you a story that will shake your beliefs and leave you utterly speechless. Calliope Thatcher, an ordinary woman, died and came back to life with a shocking revelation. The truth about God. What she discovered on the other side is something no one ever imagined. And it promises to change everything you thought you knew about the divine. Get ready, because this story will move you in ways you never expected. Before we begin, make sure to leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and hit the bell to receive all notifications. Now, let's embark on this revealing journey together. My name is Calliope Thatcher, and I'm here to share with you an experience that completely changed my life and my perception of the world. I never imagined I would one day be at death's door, much less that I would return to tell this story. But life has a peculiar way of surprising us, doesn't it? I'm an ordinary woman, like so many others you could find on the streets of Portland. I'm 32 years old, married to Eli, my life partner, and together we have a lovely daughter named Sophie. Our life was relatively peaceful and happy. I worked as a literature teacher at a local school, loved my job, and felt I was making a difference in my students' lives. In January 2024, we were eagerly awaiting the arrival of our second child. The pregnancy was going well, and I felt full and fulfilled. We had big plans for the future, dreams that seemed within our grasp. I trusted more in what I could see and touch than in spiritual or religious experiences. As for death, well, it was something I preferred not to think about too much. Like most people, I saw it as something far away, something that happened to others, not to me. After all, I was young, healthy, and had my whole life ahead of me, right? But life has a way of reminding us of our fragility when we least expect it. And that's exactly what happened to me that cold winter in Portland. What started as an ordinary night turned into a journey that would take me to the limits between life and death, and make me question everything I believed I knew about existence. This experience not only changed my view of life and death, but also completely transformed the way I see the world, the people around me, and crowds, most importantly, myself. This is the journey I want to share with you today. A journey of pain, fear, and loss, but also of discovery, love, and a deeper understanding of what truly matters in this life. Prepare yourselves for a story that defies logic and reason, a story that made me rethink everything I believed to be true. It's a story about life, death, and love that transcends both. It's my story, and I hope that by sharing it, I can touch your hearts and perhaps even change the way you see the world. It all began on a cold January night. The snow was gently falling outside, covering Portland with a silent, white blanket. I was in the third trimester of my pregnancy, my belly round and heavy, full of promises and expectations. Eli and I were sitting on the couch, planning the baby's room, discussing names, and dreaming about the future. That's when I felt it, a sharp, sudden pain that took my breath away. At first, I thought it was just a normal discomfort from pregnancy. After all, my body was going through so many changes, but something in the back of my mind told me this was different. The pain intensified, becoming unbearable within minutes, and then, the blood, so much blood, staining my clothes, running down my legs. Panic consumed me. I screamed for Eli, who came rushing in. His eyes widened in fear at the sight. Without a second thought, he scooped me up and carried me to the car. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Every bump in the road was agony. I could feel my life slipping away with the blood. The fear wasn't just for my life, but mainly for my baby's. I silently begged, praying like I'd never prayed before, asking God to save my child. We arrived at the emergency room, and I was immediately taken inside. The hospital's fluorescent lights blinded me, and the voices of the doctors and nurses sounded distant and muffled. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion, yet too fast for me to process. I vaguely remember being placed on a gurney, needles being inserted into my arms, machines beeping around me. The doctors spoke quickly, using terms I didn't understand. Eli was there, holding my hand, but I could barely feel his touch. I was growing weaker and more distant. The hours that followed were a blur of pain, fear, and confusion. At some point, I heard the words I feared the most. "I'm sorry, but we lost the baby." It was as if the world collapsed around me. I wanted to scream, cry, but I didn't have the strength even for that. The doctors told me I had suffered a placental abruption, a rare and dangerous complication. They managed to control the bleeding, but the damage was done. My baby, that tiny being I already loved so much, was gone before he even had a chance to live. I was sent home the next day with instructions to rest and return if the bleeding worsened. But something inside me knew that not everything was okay. I felt empty, not just emotionally but physically too. It was as if a part of me had been ripped away, leaving a hole I didn't know how to fill. The bleeding didn't completely stop. I felt weaker and more distant from reality. Eli was worried, wanted to take me back to the hospital, but I insisted I'd be fine. I didn't want to believe that something else could go wrong. We had already lost so much. Little did I know that this was just the beginning. That soon, I would be on the verge of not only losing another child, but losing my own life. And that this loss would take me on a journey that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. The day after I returned home, the feeling that something was wrong only grew stronger. My body seemed to be shutting down slowly, like a candle burning down to its last wick. The bleeding continued, silent and relentless. I felt dizzy, weak, as if I was floating outside my own body. I remember going to the bathroom that morning. Eli was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast that I knew I wouldn't be able to eat. As I stood up, the world spun around me. My legs gave way and my hands grew cold and numb. I tried to call out to Eli, but my voice wouldn't come. That's when it happened. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet, and I felt my body fall. There was no pain, just a strange feeling of lightness. And then, darkness. But it wasn't ordinary darkness. It was dense, tangible, as if I were submerged in an ocean of black ink. The pressure around me was crushing, making it impossible to breathe. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but my limbs felt trapped in that viscous darkness. In the midst of this void, I saw something. A light, distant and faint at first, but gradually growing stronger. It was like a beacon in the storm, calling me, guiding me. And there, in that light, I saw Eli. He was waiting for me, his arms outstretched toward me, his face a mix of love and concern. Desperately, I tried to reach him. Every fiber of my being longed for that light, for that love. But the more I tried to get closer, the more something seemed to pull me down, back into the depths of that oppressive darkness. It was like a battle between two forces, the light calling me and the darkness that didn't want to let me go. In that moment, I felt a fear I had never experienced before. It wasn't the fear of death itself, but the fear of leaving behind everything I loved. Eli, Sophie, our life together, all the dreams and plans we had made. The thought of leaving them, of abandoning them, was unbearable. Then I heard something. A voice, distant and muffled at first, but becoming clearer. It was the voice of a nurse. "Mrs. Thatcher, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." The voice was like an anchor, pulling me back to reality. Slowly, the darkness began to dissipate. The pressure around me lessened, and I felt the air returning to my lungs. I opened my eyes, blinking against the bright hospital lights. I was back, but the feeling of that experience was still vividly present in my mind. The doctors later told me that I had suffered severe bleeding due to complications from the miscarriage. I had lost a lot of blood and nearly went into hypovolemic shock. In simple terms, I had been on the brink of death. I stayed in the hospital for a few days, receiving blood transfusions and being closely monitored. But even when I returned home, something inside me had changed. The experience of that darkness, that struggle between light and shadows, had left a deep mark on my soul. I didn't know it at the time, but that was just the prelude. The real encounter with the unknown, with something far beyond my understanding, was yet to come, and it would be an experience that would change not only my perception of life and death, but of the very nature of reality. After my brief stay in the hospital, I returned home, hoping that the worst was behind me. Eli was always by my side, taking care of me with a love and dedication that moved me deeply. Sophie, our daughter, though too young to fully understand what was happening, seemed to sense that something wasn't right. She was quieter than usual, sometimes just sitting beside me on the bed, holding my hand with her little fingers. But the feeling that something was still wrong persisted. It was as if my body was fighting a silent battle, and I could feel that I was losing. The exhaustion was constant, overwhelming. Even the simplest tasks, like getting out of bed or taking a shower, seemed to require superhuman effort. In the early hours of the third day after returning from the hospital, I woke up feeling strangely restless. There was a buzzing in my ears, and my vision seemed oddly blurred around the edges. I tried to sit up in bed, but the world began to spin violently around me. Eli, I called weakly, but my voice was only a whisper. He was sleeping deeply beside me, exhausted after days of constant worry. I tried to reach out to him, but my arm felt too heavy to move. Then I felt it. A wave of intense cold swept through my body, followed by suffocating heat. My heart began to race frantically, as if it wanted to escape my chest. I knew something was terribly wrong. With supreme effort, I managed to get out of bed. But as soon as I stood up, my legs gave out. I collapsed to the floor with a dull thud, unable to move or call for help. And then, it happened again. The darkness began to close in around me, but this time, it was different. There was no sense of submersion, of being trapped. Instead, it was as if I were floating, drifting away from my body and everything I knew. For a brief moment, I saw the scene from above, my body lying on the floor of the bedroom, Eli still sleeping in bed, unaware of what was happening. I wanted to scream, to warn him, but I had no voice. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The darkness dissipated, and I found myself in a place that defied all logic and reason. It was a room, if I can call it that, without visible walls, without a distinguishable ceiling or floor. It was an empty space, yet at the same time, it seemed to contain everything. Around me, I saw flashes of light. Each of these flashes was like a window, projecting scenes from my life. I saw my birth, my first steps, the day I met Eli, our wedding, Sophie's birth. Every significant moment of my existence was there, floating around me like luminous soap bubbles. The most surprising thing was that, as I saw these scenes, I didn't just feel nostalgia or emotion. It was as if I could experience each moment again, with an intensity that went beyond physical senses. The joy of my wedding, the overwhelming love I felt when I held Sophie for the first time, even the recent pain of losing my baby. It was all there, vivid and palpable. But there was something more, something that deeply disturbed me. The actions of which I was most proud, those I believed to be my greatest virtues, seemed to have lost their shine. It was as if I could see through them, perceiving the true motivations behind each act of kindness or generosity. I saw myself donating to charity, not out of pure compassion, but from a desire to be seen as a good person. I saw myself helping a struggling student, not just for their benefit, but to feed my ego as a teacher. Every good deed I had done throughout my life was there, exposed in its true essence, stripped of any pretense or self-deception. It was a moment of profound revelation and, I must admit, shame. I realized that much of what I considered virtue was, in fact, motivated by subtle selfishness, by a desire for approval or recognition. It was as if my entire life was being weighed on a cosmic scale, without filters or illusions. And then, in the midst of this deep and sometimes painful self-reflection, I felt something else, a presence. It wasn't something I could see or hear in the conventional sense, but it was undeniably real, more real than anything I had ever experienced in my life. It was God, not the God I had been taught to fear in church, not the severe judge I imagined was always ready to punish my sins. It was a force of love so pure, so unconditional, that it completely overwhelmed me. I cried, not out of sadness or fear, but out of pure joy and gratitude for being in the presence of something so indescribably beautiful and loving. In that moment, I understood. I understood that love, in its purest and truest form, is the only thing that truly matters. Not love as a fleeting emotion or a conditioned feeling, but as the very essence of the universe, the force that binds all things together. The lights around me began to shine more brightly, and in them, I saw Eli and Sophie. But they weren't just images of them. It was as if their souls were there, connected to mine in a way I had never imagined possible. I could feel their love for me, pure and unconditional, just as I loved them. It was a love that transcended time and space, a love that I knew would continue to exist even after death. It was in that moment that I realized a profound truth. Even if I died, I could still communicate with them through this love. Death wouldn't be the end, but merely a transition to a different form of existence. But then, something stopped me. A sudden and overwhelming fear took hold of me. What if, over time, they no longer felt my presence? What if the pain of loss consumed them so much that they couldn't feel my love anymore? This fear was the only moment in the entire experience when I felt something other than that deep peace and unconditional love. This fear made me want to return. I needed to return, not for myself, but for them. I needed to be there, physically present, for Sophie and Eli. I needed to have the chance to live this love more fully and consciously than I ever had before. With all the strength of my soul, I asked to go back. I begged, not with words, but with every part of my being, to be given another chance. And then, I felt a pull. It was as if I were being yanked from that place of infinite peace and love, dragged back to my body and the physical reality I knew. The transition was abrupt and shocking. Suddenly, I was back in my body, lying on the cold floor of the bedroom. The pain returned immediately, along with the awareness of the fragility of my physical state. Every breath was a struggle. Every beat of my heart seemed to require an inhuman effort. Eli was beside me, panicked, shouting my name. I could hear the ambulance siren approaching. I fought to keep my eyes open. To tell Eli that I loved him, that everything would be okay, but the words wouldn't come and the darkness threatened to swallow me again. This time, however, it was different. I knew I had to fight to stay, not out of fear of death, but because of the love I had experienced and now understood in a completely new way. Every second was a battle, my body fighting against death while my mind clung to the memory of that unconditional love I had experienced. The paramedics arrived, and I was quickly taken to the ambulance. The only thing that felt real was the certainty of the love I had experienced and the determination to live so I could share that love with my family. As the ambulance sped through the streets of Portland toward the hospital, I floated between two worlds. Part of me was still in that place of infinite peace and love, while another part fought desperately to remain in the physical world. It was a sensation of being divided, yet strangely unified by a purpose: to live for love. The period following my arrival at the hospital was a constant battle between life and death. Every moment was precious, every breath a victory. The doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize my condition, fighting against the hemorrhage that threatened to drain my life. I fluctuated between states of consciousness and unconsciousness. In the moments when I was awake, the pain was almost unbearable. My body seemed to be at war with itself, struggling to rebuild while combating the threat of infection and organ failure. But in the moments of unconsciousness, something extraordinary happened. I returned to that place of peace and love that I had experienced during my near-death experience. It was as if my soul was divided between two worlds, the physical, full of pain and struggle, and the spiritual, filled with love and understanding. In those moments of transcendence, I could feel again that loving presence I had experienced before. It wasn't exactly the same overwhelming intensity, but it was undeniably real and comforting. It was as if this presence was constantly reminding me why I was fighting to live. Eli was always by my side, holding my hand, speaking to me even when I couldn't respond. His voice was an anchor, pulling me back into the physical world when I seemed to be drifting away. Sometimes, when I opened my eyes, I saw silent tears streaming down his face, and my heart ached with the desire to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay. Sophie couldn't visit me in the ICU, but Eli told me she made drawings for me every day. He hung them around my bed, creating a little rainbow of love and hope amidst the sterile and cold hospital environment. The days passed in a blur of tests, procedures, and medications. My body fought to recover, and every small step forward was celebrated as a great victory. Slowly, very slowly, I began to improve. But the battle wasn't just physical. As my body healed, my mind and soul underwent a profound transformation. The experience I had during my near-death wasn't something I could simply forget or leave behind. It had fundamentally changed the way I saw the world and my place in it. I began to see beauty in things I had previously overlooked: the kind smile of a nurse, the sound of rain on the hospital window, the warmth of Eli's hand in mine. Every little detail seemed imbued with deep and sacred meaning. At the same time, I struggled to reconcile my transcendent experience with the everyday reality of the hospital. How could I explain to the doctors and nurses that while my body fought to survive, my soul had experienced something beyond human comprehension? How could I put into words the feeling of unconditional love and universal connection? I chose to keep these experiences to myself, at least for now. But they were always there, shaping my perception and response to everything happening around me. Every interaction, every decision, every moment of pain or comfort was filtered through the lens of that transformative experience. As my health improved, I began to feel a growing urgency, a need to live differently, to love more deeply, to be more present in every moment. The life I had lived before now seemed so distant, so limited compared to what I knew was possible. Finally, after weeks of struggle, the doctors announced that I was out of danger. I could leave the ICU and be transferred to a regular room. It was a moment of joy and gratitude, but also of apprehension. I knew I was about to return to the world, to my everyday life. But how could I be the same person after everything I had experienced? As I was being wheeled to my new room, I looked out the window and saw the sun setting over Portland. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, a spectacle of beauty that took my breath away. In that moment, I felt a wave of love and gratitude so intense that it brought me to tears. I had survived. I had fought and won, but I knew the true journey was just beginning. The journey of living fully, of loving unconditionally, of becoming the person I had glimpsed during that transcendent experience. As the sun disappeared over the horizon, I made a silent promise to myself. I promised to live each day with awareness and gratitude, to love more deeply, forgive more easily, and live more authentically. To share what I had learned, in the hope that it might bring a little more light and love into the world. Night fell over Portland, but within me, a new light had been born, a light that, I knew, would never fade. After weeks in the hospital, the day finally came to go home. It was a mix of emotions: joy at returning to my home and family, anxiety about how I would resume my everyday life, and a deep sense of responsibility for what I had experienced and learned. Eli came to pick me up, his face a mix of relief and concern. As I got into the car, I was flooded with memories. The last time I had been in this car, I was fighting for my life. Now I was going home, transformed in ways I was only beginning to understand. The drive home was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. It was as if Eli could sense that something profound had changed in me, and he was giving me space to process. I looked out the window, watching the familiar streets of Portland go by. Everything looked the same, yet at the same time, completely different. The colors seemed more vibrant, the details sharper. It was as if I was seeing the world through new eyes. When we arrived home, Sophie ran to greet me, her little arms wrapping around my legs. The feeling of holding her again was indescribable. I could feel the pure, unconditional love flowing between us, and for a moment I was transported back to that transcendent experience. It was the same love, the same connection, but now manifested in the physical world. Entering our home was a surreal experience. Everything was exactly as I had left it. But I was no longer the same person who had walked out that door weeks ago. Every object, every room seemed imbued with new meaning. The couch where Eli and I used to sit and watch movies, the kitchen table where we shared our meals, Sophie's room filled with her toys and drawings, all of it now seemed sacred, precious in a way I had never realized before. The first days at home were a period of adjustment. My body was still recovering, and I tired easily. But more than the physical exhaustion, it was the mental and emotional readjustment that proved challenging. I found myself lost in thought, replaying my experience, trying to understand its meaning and implications for my life. How could I integrate what I had learned into my daily routine? I looked at Eli, his eyes full of love and concern, and felt a lump in my throat. How could I explain something so profound, so beyond everyday experience? I took a deep breath and began to speak. Eli, I said, my voice trembling slightly. While I was in the hospital, between life and death, I experienced something that changed everything. I told him about the darkness, the light, the scenes of my life flashing before my eyes. I spoke about the loving presence I felt, so vast and unconditional that it defied any description. I tried to explain how I saw our souls connected, how I understood that love was the most powerful force in the universe. Eli listened in silence, his hands holding mine. I could see a mix of emotions in his eyes, confusion, awe, perhaps even a bit of fear. When I finished, we sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. Calliope, I can't say I fully understand what you went through, but I can see how it's affected you. You're different. In a good way, I think. There's a light in you that wasn't there before. His words touched me deeply. Eli had always been my anchor, my grounding in reality. Knowing that he could see the change in me, that he was open to accepting this new version of me, was incredibly comforting. In the days and weeks that followed, I began trying to integrate my experience into my daily life. Every hug from Eli was a tangible reminder of that deep connection I had felt. Even the most mundane tasks, washing dishes, folding clothes, took on an almost meditative quality. I started practicing mindfulness, trying to be fully present in each moment. I meditated daily, seeking to reconnect with that feeling of peace and love I had experienced. Sometimes I succeeded, other times it seemed frustratingly out of reach. But I kept trying. My relationship with spirituality also changed drastically. I could no longer be content with the simplistic answers I had accepted before. I began exploring different spiritual traditions, seeking wisdom in ancient texts and contemplative practices. I wasn't searching for a new religion, but rather a way to understand and integrate my experience. At the same time, I felt a growing need to share what I had learned. I didn't want to preach or convert anyone, but I felt a responsibility to share the message of love and connection that I had received. I started small, with conversations with close friends and family. Some were receptive, others skeptical. Some looked at me as if I had gone crazy, others with respectful curiosity. I learned not to be offended by skepticism, to understand that my experience was deeply personal and that not everyone could relate to it. A significant shift occurred in my approach to teaching. When I returned to the classroom, I realized I could no longer teach the same way. Literature, which I had always loved, took on a new dimension. I began to see each story, each poem, as a window into the human experience, a way to explore the big questions of existence. I encouraged my students to think more deeply, to question their assumptions, to seek meaning beyond the superficial. I didn't speak directly about my near-death experience, but I allowed the lessons I had learned to permeate my teaching. One day, a student approached me after class. "Mrs. Thatcher," he said, "there's something different about you. It's like you know something the rest of us don't." I smiled, touched by his perception. "Maybe," I replied, "or maybe I've just learned to see what's always been there." As the months passed, I felt that I was finding a new balance. The intensity of my experience didn't fade, but I learned to integrate it into my daily life. The unconditional love I had experienced became a driving force in my life, influencing every choice, every interaction. My relationship with Eli deepened in ways I hadn't imagined possible. There was a new intimacy between us, an understanding that went beyond words. He continued to be my support, my partner, but now he was also my companion on this spiritual journey. With Sophie, I discovered new patience and presence. Every moment with her became precious, an opportunity to see the world through her curious, innocent eyes. I tried to teach her about love and compassion, not just with words, but by living the principles I had learned. However, not everything was easy. There were days when reality felt too heavy, when I longed for the peace and clarity I had experienced. There were moments of doubt, when I questioned whether it had really happened or if it was just a product of my mind in crisis. But then, in the most unexpected moments, watching the sun rise over the mountains, hearing a particularly moving piece of music, feeling Sophie's tight embrace, I was flooded again with that sense of love and connection. And I knew, deep in my being, that what I had experienced was real and true. Learning, growing, loving, trying to be a beacon of light and love in the world, just as that loving presence had been for me. It wasn't always easy, but it was always meaningful. And in the end, I realized that's what life was about, not reaching a final destination. One of the most significant changes was my perception of time. Before, I lived very much in the future, planning, anticipating, worrying about what might happen, or I was stuck in the past, replaying mistakes, regretting missed opportunities. Now, I understood the vital importance of the present. Each moment became precious, a unique opportunity to experience life in all its fullness. I began practicing mindfulness not just during meditation, but in every aspect of my life. While eating, I savored each bite as if it were the first time. While walking, I felt the contact of my feet with the ground, the fresh air on my face, the sounds and smells around me. My relationship with nature also transformed profoundly. I began to see the natural world not as something separate from me, but as an extension of my own being. Every tree, every flower, every cloud in the sky seemed to pulse with the same vital energy I had experienced during my near-death experience. I started taking regular walks in a park near home. Sometimes, I would take Sophie with me, using the opportunity to teach her about the interconnectedness of all things. We would watch ants working in harmony, bees pollinating flowers, birds building their nests. "See, Sophie," I would say, "everything is connected, just as we are connected to all of this." Another significant change was in my relationship with fear. Before, the fear of death, failure, or the unknown often paralyzed me. Now, though I still felt fear at times, it no longer held the same power over me. I had experienced something beyond death and knew there was nothing to fear. This gave me new courage to face challenges and take risks. I decided, for example, to start writing a book about my experience. I didn't know if anyone would read it or believe it, but I felt it was important to share my story. My perspective on suffering also changed. Before, I saw suffering as something to be avoided at all costs. Now, I understood that suffering, though painful, could be an opportunity for growth and transformation. I remembered how my own near-death experience, though terrifying and painful, had led me to a deeper understanding of life. That didn't mean I sought suffering or glorified it. But when difficulties arose, a disagreement with Eli, a disappointment at work, a concern about health, I faced them with a new perspective. I asked myself, what can I learn from this? How can this help me grow? My understanding of love also expanded enormously. The love I had experienced during my near-death experience was so vast, so unconditional, that it made the love I had known before seem small in comparison. I realized I had spent much of my life confusing love with attachment, need, and desire. Now, I strove to love in a purer, more selfless way. This didn't mean I loved Eli or Sophie any less. On the contrary, my love for them deepened immensely. But now I loved them in a freer, less possessive way. I loved them not for what they could give me, but simply because they existed. This new understanding of love extended beyond my immediate family. I began to see every person I met as a manifestation of that loving energy I had experienced. It wasn't always easy, especially with difficult or unpleasant people, but I tried to look beyond appearances, to connect with the divine essence I believed existed in each being. My relationship with material possessions also changed drastically. Things that once seemed so important, having the right house, the right car, the right clothes, now seemed insignificant. I began to let go of many things, donating what I didn't need, simplifying our life. I found that the less I had, the freer I felt. However, not all the changes were easy or well received by those around me. Some friends and family thought I had changed too much, that I was no longer the same person they knew. Others were uncomfortable with my new spiritual perspective, especially those who held more traditional or skeptical views of religion. There were moments when I felt alone, misunderstood, moments when I doubted myself, wondering if I was simply going crazy. But then I would remember the intensity and reality of my experience and find the strength to continue my journey. Eli was my greatest support during this period of transition. Although he didn't always fully understand what I was going through, he was always there, listening, supporting, loving. His constant presence and unconditional love were anchors that kept me grounded in reality as I navigated these profound internal changes. Over time, I began to find balance. I learned to live with one foot in each world, the physical world, with its demands and limitations, and the spiritual world I had glimpsed. It wasn't always easy, but it was incredibly enriching. I realized that true transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's an ongoing process, a path that unfolds day by day. Each choice, each interaction, each moment of awareness was an opportunity to live according to the truths I had discovered. And so, I continued my journey, not as someone who had all the answers, but as an eternal student, always open to new insights, always seeking a deeper connection with the universal love I had experienced. I knew I still had much to learn, much to grow, but I also knew that each step on this journey was precious, an opportunity to experience life in all its depth and beauty. As time passed and I felt more confident in my new understanding of the world, I began to feel a growing need to share my experience with others. It wasn't a desire to convince anyone or prove anything, but rather a sense of responsibility. I had been given a glimpse of something beyond our everyday reality, and I felt I had a duty to share this vision with the world. I started modestly, with individual conversations with close friends and family. It wasn't always easy. Often, I encountered skepticism or disbelief. Some people looked at me as if I had lost my mind, while others seemed uncomfortable with the subject of death and spirituality. But occasionally, I found someone who truly listened, who opened themselves to the possibility that there was more to life than we could see or touch. These conversations were deeply gratifying and encouraged me to continue sharing. I then decided to take a step further. I started writing a blog, sharing not only my near-death experience but also the reflections and changes it had triggered in my life. At first, I had only a few readers, mainly curious friends and family, but gradually, the blog began to attract more attention. People from all over the country, and eventually from around the world, began to write to me. Some shared their own near-death experiences, relieved to finally find someone who understood what they had been through. Others were people who had lost loved ones and found comfort in my description of the other side. There were also skeptics who questioned every detail of my story, but even these interactions were valuable, forcing me to examine and articulate my experience in new ways. One day, I received an email from a publisher. She had read my blog and was interested in publishing a book about my experience. I was simultaneously thrilled and apprehensive. Writing a book would mean exposing my story to a much larger audience. It would mean opening myself up to more scrutiny, more criticism, but it would also mean the opportunity to reach more people, to share the message of love and connection I had received. After much reflection and discussion with Eli, I decided to accept the offer. The process of writing the book was intense and often emotionally exhausting. Reliving my experience in detail, trying to capture in words something that seemed beyond language, it was a huge challenge. But it was also incredibly cathartic and enlightening. When the book was finally published, the response was overwhelming. I received invitations to give talks, appear on radio and TV shows. Suddenly, I found myself at the center of a much larger debate about life after death, spirituality, and the meaning of existence. Not all the attention was positive, of course. There were critics who dismissed my experience as a hallucination induced by drugs or a lack of oxygen to the brain. Some religious groups accused me of heresy. There were moments when the negativity and skepticism made me doubt myself. But for every critical voice, there were many more that expressed gratitude. People who found hope in my story, who felt less alone in their own spiritual experiences, and that gave me the strength to continue. As my story spread, I began to notice changes not only in my personal life but also in the community around me. People started seeking me out not just to hear about my experience, but to seek guidance and comfort in their own moments of difficulty. I began organizing discussion groups in our local community. These weren't religious groups in the traditional sense, but safe spaces where people could explore spiritual questions, share their own experiences, and seek deeper meaning in their lives. These groups grew and multiplied. Soon, there were meetings happening in homes, CIOs, libraries, and TEOs, and community centers all over Portland. People of all ages and backgrounds came together to discuss not just life after death, but also how to live more fully here and now. I saw families reconnecting, people overcoming addictions, individuals finding new purpose in their lives. I don't attribute this to myself or my story, but to the openness it created for deeper, more meaningful conversations. My work as a teacher was also deeply impacted. I began incorporating more discussions about ethics, philosophy, and the meaning of life into my literature classes. My students seemed to respond positively, engaging in deep discussions that went far beyond the standard curriculum. Looking back on everything that has happened since that fateful night in January 2024, I am amazed at the journey I've taken. What began as a tragedy, the loss of a child and a near-death experience, has turned into something that has brought new meaning and purpose to my life. I can't say I fully understand what happened to me or why it happened. There is much about my experience that remains a mystery, much that defies rational explanation. But I have learned to live with that mystery, even to embrace it. What I know for sure is that the experience of unconditional love and universal connection that I felt fundamentally changed who I am and how I see the world. It taught me that there is so much more to reality than we can perceive with our physical senses, that death is not the end, and that love is the most powerful force in the universe. I also learned that we don't need to have a near-death experience to access this truth. It is available to all of us at any moment if we just stop to look, to feel, to connect. Today, I continue my journey. I keep learning, growing, and sharing. I know I still have much to discover and much to understand, but I am no longer afraid of the unknown. On the contrary, I embrace it with curiosity and gratitude. For those reading this who may be going through their own struggles or questions, I want to say, you are not alone. There is more love and connection in the universe than we can imagine. Be open to it. Allow yourself to feel. Allow yourself to love and be loved. And always remember, every moment is precious. Every breath is a miracle. Every interaction is an opportunity to spread love and light into the world. Live fully, love deeply, and know that, in the end, everything is interconnected in a cosmic tapestry of infinite love. This is the lesson my journey between life and death has taught me, and it is the message I hope to continue sharing for the rest of my days. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to watch every new video and help us spread this message to as many people as possible. See you next time.